Let's complete the square to solve 3x squared plus 4x equals 1. So we notice this is a quadratic expression, or quadratic equation, excuse me, because we have the highest power of x is 2. So remember a, says if a is not 1, a is the coefficient of x squared. So this is your a right here. Okay, and this is your b. So a is 3 and b is 4. Okay. So if a is not 1, and we see our a is not 1, we're going to make it 1 by dividing every term by a. So we have 3x squared plus 4x equals 1, and we're going to divide every single term by a. So divide by 3, divide by 3, divide by 3. So we end up with x squared plus the fraction 4/3 times x equals 1/3. So done with that. Now we're going to move the constant to the right-hand side. Oh, look, there it is. Already on the right-hand side. It was given to us in that form. So done. Now we're actually going to do the process where we complete the square on x. So we're going to take the coefficient of x, and I want to point out the coefficient of x from the beginning was b, was 4. We have changed it now in this step in the equation. The coefficient of x now is 4/3. So be very careful. When it says multiply 1/2 times the coefficient of x, it's not talking about the original. It's talking about the coefficient of x after you've done steps 1 and 2. Okay. So over here we're going to do 1/2 times the coefficient of x. Well, our new coefficient of x is 4/3. Right, 4/3. Now to multiply fractions, you do numerator times numerator over denominator times denominator. But you can also reduce them reducing. So we see that we have a 4 on top and a 2 on the bottom. Divide both by 2. So you really get 2. Because 4 divided by 2 is 2. 2 on top. So 2/3. We get 2/3. Okay, so that was like 3a. Multiply 1/2 by the coefficient of x. Okay, now we're going to square it. And go ahead and leave it as 2/3 parentheses squared. Notice this says leave as b over 2a. Well, our b was 4. And then divided by 2a. So 4 divided by 6. Let's just check. b over 2a we see is 4/6. Well, divide both of those by 2 because we're going to reduce, right? 4 divided by 2 is 2. 6 divided by 2 is 3. Do you see that b over 2a is the same as 2/3 for our example? Okay, now we're going to add that to the left-hand side and to the right-hand side. So let me just rewrite what we have. X squared plus 4/3 x, and then we have equals 1/3. But we're going to add the new term to both sides. So plus 2/3 squared plus 2/3 squared. Okay. That's legal because I just added something to the left and the same thing to the right. So now we're going to factor the left-hand side. LHS means left-hand side. Notice it says it factors as x plus b over 2a. All of that squared. So in other words, we're going to take the two things that are being squared right here. So x is being squared and 2/3 is being squared. We're going to rewrite this as x plus 2/3 squared. And rewrite the right-hand side equals 1/3 plus, well, we have 2/3 squared. So we know that we have a rule from algebra that says a over b squared equals, a over b to the n, let's do it in general, equals a to the n over b to the n. So 2/3 squared will be like 2 squared over 3 squared. So 2 squared is 4. And 3 squared is 9. Okay, let's just make sure everybody is up to date on what happened here. Remember, to complete the square, step 3, we created the perfect third term so that when we did this operation, it factored nicely as a perfect square binomial. So we take the two things that are being squared and we rewrite them. And you may be wondering, what? How in the world is that the same as what we started with? Okay, so let's just do some scratch over here, just to make sure you trust me and you believe this. So if we have x plus 2 over 3 squared, we can write that as x plus 2 over 3 times x plus 2 over 3. Because that's what squared means, right? Just write it twice, multiply it by itself. Okay, so what we're doing is we're checking to verify that this, when you expand it, gives you this expression. So we're going to FOIL. Okay. When we FOIL, the first is x times x, or x squared. Then we do outer, so x times 2/3, so plus 2/3 x. And then we do inner, we also get 2/3 x. And then last, we do 2/3 times 2/3, which is the same as 2/3 squared. And then combine the x terms. So I left the plus off. So 2/3 x plus 2/3 x. Well, they both have a 3 as a denominator. So you have a common denominator of 3. You can combine the numerators, 4/3. And isn't this exactly what we started here? If you're a little uncomfortable with this, just take some time and practice FOILing. Take a whole bunch of binomials squared and FOIL them back and forth. And you're going to see that this middle term every time is this number, this value times 2, right? Because we have a rule that says that a plus b quantity squared is a squared plus 2ab plus b squared. You can also find that by writing a plus b times a plus b. So you can also say, well, I take the front and the back and I multiply them together. So that's 2/3 times x. Then I multiply by 2, and that gives me the middle term. That's what this says, right? So if you're looking at something like this, it has 1, 2, 3 terms and factors as the first term and this back term in here. Okay, so let me say that better. So if you have 1, 2, 3 terms and it's expanded like this, you look at the two things that are being squared. So a is being squared and b is being squared. So you get a plus b. And then you check it. A times b times 2 gives you the middle. X times 2/3 times 2 gives you 4/3 x. Okay, so you're going to have this property every time. So let's keep going. So this is x plus 2/3 quantity squared equals. Okay, we need to combine the fractions on the right-hand side. Well, they're fractions, so we have to have a common denominator, right? Okay, so we have 1/3 and 4/9. The least common multiple of the denominators is 9, right? So I really need a 9 right here. So I do 3 times what gives me 9? Well, another 3, right? But that's an expression. I'm allowed to do 2 things to an expression without changing the truth of the expression. One is to add 0 and the other is to multiply by 1. So if I multiply the bottom by 3, I better multiply the top by 3. That way you see here I'm multiplying by the number 1. Okay. So we're going to rewrite the left-hand side another time. Okay, and then you're going to multiply fractions. You're going to do top times top, bottom times bottom. Okay. So we get 3 over 9 plus 4 over 9. So they have a common denominator. We rewrite the denominator and we combine the numerators. So x plus 2/3 squared equals 7 over 9. Okay. Now we want to solve for x. Well, where is x? X is stuck inside those sets of parentheses. So we need to somehow undo this squared power. Well, what is the opposite of squaring something? The inverse process is to take a square root, right? So we're going to come through here and we're going to take a square root of both sides. But when we take the square root of both sides, we have to put a plus or minus. When you take the square root of something squared, you're left with the thing that was being squared. So you get x plus 2/3 equals plus or minus square root of 7 over 9. We have another rule of algebra that says if you have a over b under a square root, or really an nth root, that's the same thing as the nth root of a over the nth root of b. So we can rewrite this as x plus 2/3 equals plus or minus square root of 7 over square root of 9. well, the square root of 7 is not a perfect square, or 7 rather is not a perfect square. So the square root of 7 we really can't reduce. So we have the square root of 7, but the square root of 9 is the same as 3. Okay, next we're going to subtract 2/3 from both sides. That way we have x equals stuff. So x equals negative 2/3 plus or minus the square root of 7 over 3. Now I do want to point out, sometimes students will write this as plus or minus square root of 7 over 3 minus 2/3. There's nothing wrong with that, but typically we write plus or minus, the plus or minus term at the back. Okay, so there are actually two solutions. Often you'll see this as the solution, but there are really two solutions if you break them up. Two of them. You have x equals negative 2/3 plus the square root of 7 over 3, or x equals negative 2/3 minus the square root of 7 over 3. Okay.